Harmony Gulch wasn't much to look at. A single, dusty street baked under the relentless sun. Wooden buildings, weathered and worn, lined either side. The general store, the saloon, the blacksmith, and of course, the mayor's office. Chickens pecked lazily in the dirt, and the occasional tumbleweed bounced past. A lonely dance in the vast emptiness of the Wild West. Mayor Thomas Abernathy was a good man. Honest, hard-working, and dedicated to his town. He believed in law and order, and he always tried to do what was right, even when it was hard. He wasn't the most exciting man, perhaps a little predictable, but he loved Harmony Gulch with all his heart. He just didn't quite know how to show his pretty wife, Clara, how much he loved her. Clara Abernathy was the jewel of Harmony Gulch. With her bright eyes, flowing auburn hair, and a smile that could melt glaciers, she was everything the dusty town wasn't. She was beautiful, vibrant, and restless. Clara had dreams bigger than Harmony Gulch, dreams of adventure and excitement, dreams that her life as the mayor's wife couldn't quite fulfill. She helped with town events, organized the church socials, and always had a kind word for everyone. But behind her bright smile, a yearning grew. A yearning for something more than the predictable rhythm of life in Harmony Gulch. She felt like a bird in a gilded cage, admired but not truly free. This feeling was something she never shared with Thomas, who was content and believed she was too. He was blind to the subtle discontent that simmered beneath her charming exterior. He saw only the loving wife, not the adventurous spirit yearning to break free. Then, one sweltering afternoon, a stranger rode into Harmony Gulch. He was tall and lean, with eyes as dark as coal and a smile that could charm the rattles off a snake. He wore a worn leather duster, a low-slung gun belt, and a Stetson hat pulled low over his brow. This was Black Bart, a name whispered in hushed tones from Dodge City to Tombstone. Bart wasn't just any outlaw. He was known for his daring heists and his uncanny ability to disappear without a trace. He was a legend, a phantom, a whisper of danger on the wind. Some said he was ruthless, others claimed he had a code. Whatever the truth, he was trouble with a capital T. He sauntered into the saloon, the swinging doors creaking a mournful tune behind him. The piano player stopped mid-note, and the chatter in the room died down to a nervous murmur. All eyes were on the newcomer, sizing him up, trying to gauge his intentions. Bart leaned against the bar, ordering a whiskey with a voice as smooth as velvet. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering for a moment on Clara, who had been arranging flowers on the porch of her house across the street. A flicker of something passed between them, a spark of recognition, a hint of shared secrets, or perhaps just the dangerous allure of the unknown. The mayor, busy with paperwork in his office, barely registered the arrival of the stranger. He was too preoccupied with the upcoming town council meeting and the dwindling water supply to notice the storm brewing on his doorstep. He was a good man, but sometimes good men are blind to the things that matter most. The chickens in the street were more astute, clucking softly as the stranger made his presence known. Even they sensed something was amiss. Harmony Gulch was about to be shaken. That fleeting glance between Clara and Bart held a universe of unspoken words. It was a dangerous dance of curiosity and forbidden desires. Did they know each other from before? Had their paths crossed in some dusty corner of the West? Or was it simply the magnetic pull of two souls yearning for something different? Clara felt a jolt of electricity, a thrill she hadn't experienced in years. Bart's eyes held a knowing glint, as if he saw right through her carefully constructed facade of domestic bliss. He saw the yearning, the boredom, the unfulfilled dreams. And in that moment, Clara knew her life was about to change. Perhaps they had met long ago, when Clara was a girl, before settling into the role of a mayor's wife. Maybe Bart was a figment of her imagination, a symbol of the life she could have had. Maybe he was a lost love, or maybe a glimpse of a future she hadn't dared to imagine. Later that evening, as Thomas droned on about irrigation problems at supper, Clara found herself unable to focus. Her mind was filled with the image of Black Bart, his dark eyes, his confident swagger. She excused herself early, claiming a headache, But really, she needed to escape the suffocating predictability of her life, if only for a few moments. She stepped out onto the porch, the cool night air a welcome relief. The saloon was still buzzing with activity, and she could see Bart through the window, nursing his whiskey, a solitary figure in the smoky haze. Their eyes met again, and this time, the connection was undeniable. A silent invitation, a promise of adventure, a dangerous spark that threatened to ignite everything. The air crackled with unspoken words. Clara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her carefully constructed world was about to crumble. The annual Harmony Gulch Town dance was usually a dull affair. Thomas always led Clara onto the floor for the first waltz, their steps stiff and predictable. But this year, the air was thick with anticipation. Black Bart was there, leaning against a post, watching with those dark, knowing eyes. As the music started, Thomas, beaming with civic pride, offered Clara his arm. She hesitated, her gaze flicking towards Bart. He gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, but Clara saw it. It was a challenge, an invitation, a dare. She took Thomas's arm, but her heart wasn't in it. They danced, but Clara felt like a puppet going through the motions. The other townspeople watched, whispering behind their hands. They sensed the tension, the unspoken drama playing out before them. Midway through the dance, Bart stepped onto the floor, cutting in on Thomas. A gasp rippled through the crowd. It was unheard of, a blatant challenge to the mayor's authority. Thomas, flustered and confused, could only stammer in protest as Bart swept Clara into his arms. Bart held her close, their bodies swaying to the music. He whispered in her ear, his voice low and husky, and Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. What he said no one knew, but it caused Clara to flush crimson, then pale. The dance was electric, a whirlwind of forbidden passion. They moved as one, oblivious to the stares and the mounting disapproval. Thomas stood frozen, watching his wife dance away with a notorious outlaw. The whispers grew louder, morphing into murmurs of scandal and outrage. It was clear, Harmony Gulch would never be the same. The dance was not just a dance, but a declaration. The next morning, Harmony Gulch awoke to an even bigger shock. Clara was gone. Her bed was empty, the covers neatly turned down as if she'd simply gone for a stroll. But on the pillow lay a note, addressed to Thomas. His hands trembling, Thomas unfolded the paper. The words were written in Clara's elegant script, but they cut him deeper than any knife. Thomas, it read, I'm sorry. I can't live this life anymore. I need adventure, excitement, something more than Harmony Gulch can offer. I've gone with Bart. Don't try to find me. I'll never be happy here. The note fell from his grasp, fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird. Thomas sank onto the bed, his heart a lead weight in his chest. He had been so blind, so focused on his duties as mayor that he hadn't seen the unhappiness simmering beneath Clara's smile. The news spread through Harmony Gulch like wildfire. The women clucked their tongues and shook their heads, while the men muttered about the disgrace. Some blamed Bart, calling him a snake in the grass. Others whispered that Clara had always been too good for Thomas, too wild to be tamed. The mayor sat alone in his house, the note clutched in his hand. He reread the words, searching for some hidden meaning, some clue that would explain why Clara had left. But there was nothing, only the stark reality of her absence. He had lost his wife, his love, and the jewel of Harmony Gulch was now riding off into the sunset with a notorious outlaw. The only thing he could do now was try to pick up the pieces, even if his heart was shattered beyond repair. The chickens outside seemed to cluck in sympathy, or perhaps they were just hungry. Either way, Harmony Gulch was a sadder, quieter place that day. The initial shock soon gave way to a dull ache in Harmony Gulch. The town felt smaller, emptier without Clara's bright presence. Thomas, though heartbroken, tried to carry on. He threw himself into his work, hoping to forget his pain, but Clara's absence was a constant reminder of his failure. The townsfolk, initially sympathetic, soon grew tired of Thomas's quiet grief. They needed a strong leader, someone who could focus on the town's problems, not a broken man dwelling on the past. Whispers started again, this time questioning Thomas's ability to lead. The saloon, once a place of lively chatter, became subdued. The piano player played slower, sadder tunes. Even the chickens seemed less cheerful, their pecking taking on a mournful quality. Harmony Gulch was a town in mourning, not just for Clara, but for the hope and happiness she had taken with her. Adding to the town's woes, bandits became more frequent. Small ranches were raided, stagecoaches were robbed, and fear gripped the hearts of the townsfolk. Thomas tried to organize a posse, but the men were reluctant, their trust shaken by Clara's betrayal. How could they trust their mayor when he couldn't even keep his own wife? Some muttered that Black Bart was behind the increased banditry, taking advantage of the town's weakened state. Others wondered if Clara was involved, somehow connected to the outlaws. The rumors swirled, fueled by fear and suspicion. Thomas, already burdened by grief and self-doubt, felt the weight of the town's problems pressing down on him. He was losing control, and Harmony Gulch was teetering on the brink of chaos. He needed to find a way to restore order, to regain the trust of his people, and to prove that he was still the leader they needed, even without Clara by his side. But the task seemed impossible, a mountain too high to climb. The chickens seemed to mock him with their plaintive cries. Months turned into a year. The seasons changed, painting the landscape with different hues, but the cloud of despair hanging over Harmony Gulch remained. The bandit raids continued, growing bolder and more frequent. It was as if the outlaws knew exactly when and where to strike, their knowledge of the town eerily precise. Thomas, worn down but resolute, spent countless nights patrolling the outskirts of Harmony Gulch, his rifle clutched tight. He organized town meetings, trying to rally the dispirited citizens. He even sent word to neighboring towns, pleading for help, but few were willing to risk their own safety for a town plagued by scandal and misfortune. The general store owner, Mr. Henderson, started marking up prices, claiming the increased risk justified it. The saloon owner, Old Man Hemlock, watered down the whiskey even further, trying to squeeze every last penny out of his dwindling clientele. The spirit of community was eroding, replaced by self-preservation and distrust. One particularly harsh winter, supplies ran low. The stagecoach, usually a lifeline to the outside world, was ambushed repeatedly, leaving Harmony Gulch isolated and vulnerable. Hunger gnawed at the bellies of the children, and fear etched lines on the faces of the adults. Thomas, desperate, considered leaving Harmony Gulch, admitting defeat. But something held him back, a sense of duty, a stubborn refusal to let the town crumble completely. He remembered Clara's bright smile, the hope she had once represented, and he knew he couldn't abandon the town to darkness. He just needed a plan, a way to fight back, to restore hope to Harmony Gulch. He just wished the chickens would stop staring at him with their beady little eyes. They were starting to get on his nerves. Then, a new terror arrived in Harmony Gulch, a gang of outlaws, unlike any they had seen before. They were ruthless, organized, and led by a mysterious figure known only as the Serpent. The Serpent wore a mask, concealing their identity, and their voice was always muffled, making it impossible to discern their gender or age. The Serpent's gang didn't just rob and pillage. They seemed to enjoy inflicting fear and humiliation. They would tie up the men, force the women to cook for them, and then leave with whatever they pleased, leaving the town shaken and demoralized. What was even more unsettling was the Serpent's knowledge of Harmony Gulch. They knew the location of the town's hidden water reserves, the weaknesses in the bank security, and the personal secrets of many of the townsfolk. He knew he had to find a way to unmask the Serpent, to expose their identity and break their hold on the town. He just couldn't shake the feeling that he knew the Serpent, that the masked figure was someone from his past, someone who knew Harmony Gulch all too well. And those chickens, they seemed to be watching him even more intently now. It was unnerving. He was starting to think they knew something he didn't. The Serpent's tactics were unnervingly familiar. They seemed to anticipate Thomas's every move, setting traps and ambushes with uncanny precision. They knew the patrol routes, the weaknesses in the town's defenses, and the hiding places used by the townsfolk. It was as if they had access to Thomas's own thoughts, his own strategies. One day, the Serpent's gang raided the general store, not for money or supplies, but for something far more valuable, Thomas's old journals. These journals contained detailed accounts of the town's history, its secrets, and its vulnerabilities. They were a treasure trove of information for anyone seeking to control Harmony Gulch. Thomas realized then that the Serpent wasn't just someone who knew the town. They were someone who knew him, someone who understood his strengths and weaknesses, someone who could anticipate his every move. The realization sent a chill down his spine. He began to scrutinize everyone, looking for clues, for any sign of betrayal. He questioned the townsfolk, but they were too afraid to speak, their eyes filled with fear and suspicion. He even considered the possibility that one of his own posse members was a traitor, feeding information to the Serpent. The atmosphere in Harmony Gulch grew even more tense, the air thick with paranoia and distrust. The townsfolk turned on each other, accusing each other of being in league with the Serpent. The community was fracturing, tearing itself apart from the inside. Thomas knew he had to act quickly, to unmask the Serpent before it was too late. But he was running out of time, out of options, and out of hope. He just couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was right in front of him, hidden in plain sight. And the chickens, they were definitely plotting something. He could feel it in his bones. He just wished he knew what their clucking meant. It sounded almost mocking. The gunfight was short, brutal, and chaotic. Bullets whizzed through the air, ricocheting off the walls of the alleyway. The Serpent's gang, caught off guard, fought fiercely, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Thomas, fueled by adrenaline and a burning desire for justice, fought his way through the melee, his eyes fixed on the Serpent. He dodged bullets, wrestled outlaws to the ground, and finally cornered the masked leader against a wall. With a roar, he lunged at the Serpent, grabbing their mask and tearing it away. The gasp that escaped the townsfolk was deafening. Standing before him, her face flushed with anger and defiance, was Clara. Thomas staggered back, his mind reeling. It couldn't be. Clara, his Clara, the woman he had loved and lost, was the Serpent, the ruthless leader who had terrorized Harmony Gulch. Clara, he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. What? Clara's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and pain. You wouldn't understand, Thomas, she said, her voice cold and hard. You never understood. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader unmasked, hesitated, their fighting spirit faltering. Thomas's posse seized the opportunity, overwhelming them and forcing them to surrender. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. Harmony Gulch had been saved from the raid, but the truth was far more devastating than any robbery. The chickens on the saloon roof, finally silent, seemed to be watching with an air of knowing sadness. Perhaps they had understood all along. Thomas certainly hadn't. He felt like the biggest fool in the West. His wife, his beloved Clara, had been the mastermind behind it all. The town was in an uproar. Clara, their Clara, the woman they had all admired and respected, had betrayed them in the worst possible way. Some were furious, demanding immediate justice. Others were confused, unable to reconcile the image of the kind-hearted Clara with the ruthless Serpent. Thomas, still reeling from the shock, struggled to make sense of it all. He led Clara to the jail, the same jail he had built with his own two hands, and locked her inside. He couldn't bring himself to hate her, but he couldn't forgive her either. That night, he sat outside her cell, keeping watch. He needed answers, an explanation for her actions. He finally spoke, his voice barely audible. Why, Clara? Why did you do this? Clara remained silent for a long time, staring at the floor. Finally, she looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and regret. I was bored, Thomas, she said, her voice low. I felt trapped, like a bird in a cage. You were so busy being the mayor, you didn't even notice I was suffocating. She went on to explain how she had met Black Bart, how he had awakened a sense of adventure within her, how he had convinced her that Harmony Gulch was a stifling prison. She had initially joined his gang for the thrill of it, for the excitement of living outside the law. But over time, she had grown disillusioned. Bart was a cruel and selfish man, interested only in money and power. She had tried to leave, but he had threatened her, blackmailing her with secrets she had shared in confidence. So, she had stayed, becoming the serpent, using her knowledge of Harmony Gulch to gain control of the gang and protect the town in her own twisted way. She thought she was shaking things up for the better, but she had only made things worse. And the chickens? She admitted she had no idea why they were always staring. It creeped her out too. Thomas listened in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the Clara he knew with the woman before him. The chickens were still silent, but their beady eyes seemed to pierce right through him. He felt like he was living in a nightmare, a twisted version of the life he had once known. The next morning, news arrived that Black Bart and the remaining members of his gang were heading towards Harmony Gulch, intent on freeing Clara and taking revenge on the town. Thomas knew he had to act fast. He couldn't risk another battle, another bloodshed. He went to Clara's cell and unlocked the door. "I need your help," he said, his voice weary. "Bart's coming. He'll destroy everything if we don't stop him." Clara hesitated, her eyes filled with doubt. "Why would I help you, Thomas? After everything I've done?" "Because you still care about this town," Thomas replied. "I know you do. And because you know Bart better than anyone. You know how he thinks, how he plans." Clara agreed, but on one condition, that she would be allowed to leave Harmony Gulch after Bart was dealt with, to start a new life somewhere far away. Thomas reluctantly agreed. Together, they devised a plan to ambush Bart and his gang. Clara knew Bart's weaknesses, his arrogance, his tendency to underestimate his opponents. She used this knowledge to set a trap, luring him into a narrow canyon outside of town. As Bart and his gang rode into the canyon, they were met with a hail of gunfire. Thomas and his posse, bolstered by Clara's knowledge of Bart's tactics, fought fiercely, driving the outlaws back. During the gunfight, Clara found herself face to face with Bart. He sneered at her, calling her a traitor. "You always were too soft for this life, Clara," he said, raising his gun. But Clara was faster. She drew her own gun and fired, hitting Bart in the chest. He crumpled to the ground, his reign of terror finally over. And the chickens? They were nowhere to be seen. Maybe they had finally gone to roost, or maybe they knew the real drama was about to begin. With Bart gone, a tense calm settled over Harmony Gulch. Clara had saved the town, but she was still a prisoner, still the serpent who had terrorized them for so long. The townsfolk were divided. Some believed she deserved to be punished, to pay for her crimes. Others argued that she had redeemed herself, that she had earned their forgiveness. Thomas, torn between his duty and his lingering feelings for Clara, struggled to make a decision. He knew he couldn't simply let her go, but he also couldn't bring himself to sentence her to a harsh punishment. He called a town meeting, allowing the citizens to voice their opinions. The debate was heated, filled with anger, resentment, and a surprising amount of sympathy for Clara. Old Man Hemlock, the saloon owner, argued that Clara had brought nothing but trouble to Harmony Gulch. Mr. Henderson, the general store owner, claimed that she had nearly bankrupted the town with her bandit raids. But Sarah, the schoolteacher, spoke in Clara's defense. She reminded the townsfolk of Clara's kindness, her generosity, her unwavering spirit. She argued that Clara had been misguided, but that she had ultimately done the right thing. Even the chickens seemed to be taking sides, some clucking angrily, others cooing softly. Thomas wished he could understand their feathered pronouncements. As the debate raged on, Thomas looked at Clara, who stood silently in the center of the town square, her face etched with regret. He knew he had to make a decision that would determine not only Clara's fate, but the future of Harmony Gulch. He just needed to find a way to balance justice with mercy, to heal the wounds that had been inflicted, and to restore hope to a town that had been through so much. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. He just hoped he could make the right choice. As the town meeting reached its peak, a rider burst into Harmony Gulch, his face pale with fear. He brought news that a large group of Bart's remaining gang members, seeking revenge for their leader's death, were on their way to destroy the town. Panic erupted. The townsfolk, already divided and demoralized, felt their last glimmer of hope extinguished. Some wanted to flee, to abandon Harmony Gulch to its fate. Others wanted to fight, but they knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. Thomas, however, refused to give up. He climbed onto a table, raising his voice above the din. "We will not run," he shouted. "We will defend our town, our homes, our families. We have faced worse before, and we will survive this too." He called on Clara, asking her to use her knowledge of the gang's tactics to help them prepare for the attack. Clara, seeing the determination in Thomas's eyes, agreed. She knew she had caused immense pain and suffering, but she also knew that she had the power to help prevent further bloodshed. Together, they organized the defense of Harmony Gulch, barricading the streets, fortifying the buildings, and positioning the townsfolk strategically. They knew they were facing a formidable enemy, but they were determined to fight to the end. As the outlaws approached, a tense silence fell over Harmony Gulch. The chickens, perhaps sensing the impending danger, had finally disappeared. Thomas stood beside Clara, his rifle in his hand, his heart filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. He knew that the fate of Harmony Gulch, and perhaps his own, rested on his shoulders. He just hoped he was strong enough to bear the weight. The final showdown was about to begin. The battle for Harmony Gulch was fierce and unrelenting. The outlaws, driven by vengeance and greed, attacked with a ferocity that threatened to overwhelm the town's defenses. Thomas and Clara, working together, moved from barricade to barricade, encouraging the townsfolk and directing their fire. But as the fighting raged, a new element entered the fray. A small group of outlaws, led by Bart's second-in-command, separated from the main force and headed towards the jail. Their intention was clear: to release the remaining members of Bart's gang and turn them loose on the town. Clara, realizing the danger, knew she had to stop them. She left Thomas to coordinate the defense of the main street and raced towards the jail, her gun drawn. She arrived just as the outlaws were breaking down the jail door. A fierce gunfight erupted, the confined space amplifying the sound and fury. Clara, outnumbered but determined, fought with a skill and courage that surprised even herself. Suddenly, Bart's second-in-command, a burly brute named Hank, grabbed Clara from behind, disarming her. He sneered at her, his eyes filled with malice. "Bart always said you were a fool, Clara," he said. "He said he only used you to get close to the town, to learn its secrets. He never cared about you." Clara's heart sank. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed, hearing the truth about Bart's betrayal, was like a knife twisting in her gut. She had been a pawn in his game, a tool to be used and discarded. The chickens, who had mysteriously reappeared on the roof of the general store, began clucking loudly, as if commenting on the unfolding drama. Thomas, hearing the commotion, raced towards the jail, his face etched with concern. The tide of the battle was about to turn, and not in Harmony Gulch's favor. Clara, her eyes filled with a newfound clarity, realized the full extent of her mistakes. She had been so blinded by her own desires, so eager for adventure, that she had failed to see the true consequences of her actions. She had hurt Thomas, betrayed her town, and allowed herself to be manipulated by a heartless outlaw. As Hank raised his gun, preparing to shoot her, Clara made a decision. She wasn't going to let Bart's betrayal define her. She wasn't going to let Harmony Gulch fall. She was going to fight back, to redeem herself, even if it meant sacrificing everything. With a sudden burst of strength, she kicked Hank in the groin, sending him sprawling. She grabbed his gun and, without hesitation, shot the other outlaws who were trying to break down the jail door. Then, she turned to Hank, who was groaning on the ground. "I'm not your pawn, Hank," she said, her voice filled with steel. "And I'm not going to let you destroy my town." She aimed the gun at Hank's head, but then hesitated. She wasn't a killer. She couldn't bring herself to take another life, even the life of someone who deserved it. Instead, she knocked him unconscious with the butt of the gun. Then, she raced out of the jail, determined to rejoin the fight and help Thomas save Harmony Gulch. The chickens, who had been squawking incessantly, suddenly fell silent. It was as if they knew that Clara had finally made the right choice, that she was finally on the path to redemption. Thomas, arriving at the jail just as Clara emerged, saw the determination in her eyes and knew that something had changed. The Clara he had once loved was back, stronger and more resolute than ever before. The final act was about to begin. Clara, once again fighting alongside Thomas, used her intimate knowledge of the outlaws' plans to turn the tide of the battle. She knew their weaknesses, their strategies, and their hiding places. She directed the townsfolk, positioning them strategically and anticipating the outlaws' every move. She knew, for instance, that a group of outlaws planned to use the old mill as a vantage point to rain down gunfire on the town. She led a small group of townsfolk through a hidden tunnel, flanking the outlaws and catching them by surprise. She also knew that the outlaws had planted explosives near the town's water supply, hoping to cut off the town's access to water and force them to surrender. She raced to the water supply, disarming the explosives just moments before they were set to detonate. Her actions inspired the townsfolk, giving them renewed hope and determination. They fought with a ferocity they hadn't known they possessed, driven by a desire to protect their homes and their families. The battle raged on, but slowly, surely, the outlaws began to lose ground. Their attacks became less coordinated. Their morale began to crumble. They had expected an easy victory, but they had underestimated the resilience of Harmony Gulch and the determination of its people. Finally, after hours of intense fighting, the remaining outlaws, realizing they were defeated, began to flee. Thomas and Clara, exhausted but triumphant, watched as they disappeared into the distance. Harmony Gulch had been saved. And the chickens? They finally flew away, their mysterious presence no longer needed. The town was safe for now, but Clara's fate still hung in the balance. The question remained, could Harmony Gulch ever truly forgive her? With the battle over, Thomas turned his attention to the remaining outlaws. He rounded them up, disarmed them, and locked them in the jail alongside Hank. He knew they had to be brought to justice, to answer for their crimes against Harmony Gulch. He sent word to the neighboring towns, requesting assistance in transporting the outlaws to the nearest federal prison. He also contacted the authorities, informing them of Bart's death and Clara's role in the events. A week later, a contingent of U.S. Marshals arrived in Harmony Gulch, escorting the outlaws to prison. Hank, still nursing a sore head, was particularly surly, vowing revenge on Clara and Thomas. As the marshals prepared to leave, they approached Thomas, their faces grim. "We need to take Clara into custody," their leader said. "She's wanted for multiple crimes, including robbery, assault, and conspiracy." Thomas knew this was coming. He had hoped that Clara's actions in saving the town would earn her some leniency, but he also knew that the law was the law. He turned to Clara, his heart heavy. "I'm sorry," he said. "I wish there was something I could do." Clara nodded, her face resigned. "I understand, Thomas," she said. "I knew this day would come." She turned to the marshals, offering them her hands for the handcuffs. As they led her away, she looked back at Thomas, a faint smile on her lips. "Thank you, Thomas," she said, "for everything." Then, she was gone, disappearing over the horizon with the marshals and the remaining outlaws. Harmony Gulch was finally at peace, but the future remained uncertain. What would become of Clara? And could Harmony Gulch ever truly heal from the wounds of the past? The answers, Thomas knew, would take time to reveal themselves. And as for the chickens, well, nobody had seen them since the battle. Maybe they had finally found a better town to haunt. Weeks turned into months. Harmony Gulch slowly began to rebuild, both physically and emotionally. The homes and businesses that had been damaged during the battle were repaired, and the townsfolk started to regain a sense of normalcy. But the memory of Clara, of her betrayal and her redemption, lingered in the air. The town remained divided, some unable to forgive her for the pain she had caused, others willing to acknowledge her courage and her sacrifice. Thomas received occasional letters from Clara, written from prison. She wrote of her remorse, her regret, and her determination to make amends for her mistakes. She also wrote of her hope that one day, Harmony Gulch would be able to forgive her. The townsfolk, however, were less forgiving. Old Man Hemlock still refused to speak her name, while Mr. Henderson continued to grumble about the money she had cost him. But Sarah, the schoolteacher, kept Clara's memory alive, telling her students stories of Clara's kindness and her bravery. She argued that everyone deserved a second chance, that even those who had made mistakes could find redemption. Thomas, too, struggled with his feelings for Clara. He still loved her, but he also couldn't forget the pain she had caused. He visited her in prison whenever he could, offering her support and encouragement. He knew that the decision of whether to forgive Clara ultimately rested with the town. He could only hope that one day they would find it in their hearts to offer her the forgiveness she so desperately craved. The chickens, wherever they were, probably had an opinion on the matter, but nobody knew for sure. Harmony Gulch waited, holding its breath, uncertain of what the future held. The healing process was slow, and the scars of the past ran deep. Then, a letter arrived from the governor's office. Due to Clara's cooperation in apprehending Bart's gang and her efforts to save Harmony Gulch, the governor was willing to offer a reduced sentence. However, it came with a condition. The mayor of Harmony Gulch had to formally request the reduced sentence and guarantee Clara's good behavior upon her release. The decision now rested squarely on Thomas's shoulders. He had to weigh his love for Clara against his duty to the town, his personal feelings against the needs of his people. He knew that requesting the reduced sentence would be a controversial decision, one that would further divide the town. Some would accuse him of being soft on crime, of putting his own desires ahead of the safety and well-being of Harmony Gulch. Others would applaud him for his compassion, for giving Clara a second chance, for showing the world that even in the Wild West, forgiveness was possible. He sought counsel from the townsfolk, but they were as divided as ever. Old Man Hemlock remained steadfast in his condemnation of Clara, while Sarah, the schoolteacher, pleaded for mercy. Thomas spent sleepless nights wrestling with his conscience. He read Clara's letters again and again, searching for some guidance, some sign that he was making the right decision. He thought back to the day she had left, the day she had run off with Bart, the day that had changed everything. He wondered if he could have done anything differently, if he could have prevented her from making the choices she had made. In the end, he knew that he had to follow his heart, to do what he believed was right, regardless of the consequences. The future of Harmony Gulch and the future of Clara depended on his decision. He walked toward his office, ready to face whatever awaited him. The chickens may have been gone, but he felt their unseen eyes upon him, judging his every move. It was time to decide. Thomas, after much soul-searching, made his decision. He requested the reduced sentence for Clara, guaranteeing her good behavior upon her release. He knew it was a risk, but he believed in her capacity for redemption. The governor, swayed by Thomas's plea and by Clara's actions in saving Harmony Gulch, granted the request. Clara was released from prison, but with a condition. She was to return to Harmony Gulch and serve the town through community service. The reaction in Harmony Gulch was mixed. Some welcomed her back with open arms, while others remained skeptical, wary of her presence. But Thomas, with quiet determination, worked to bridge the divide, to help the town heal, and to give Clara a chance to prove herself. Clara, for her part, threw herself into her community service, working tirelessly to improve the town. She helped rebuild homes, she volunteered at the school, and she even started a small garden, growing vegetables for the needy. Slowly, gradually, the townsfolk began to warm to her. They saw her sincerity, her dedication, and her willingness to make amends for her past mistakes. They began to realize that everyone deserved a second chance, that even those who had stumbled could find their way back. Harmony Gulch was forever changed by the events that had transpired, but it was also stronger, more resilient, and more compassionate. The town had learned the importance of forgiveness, of second chances, and of the enduring power of community. Thomas, though still haunted by the betrayal, found peace in knowing he had done what he believed was right. He continued to serve as mayor, leading Harmony Gulch towards a brighter future. And though the chickens never returned, Their memory served as a reminder that even the most ordinary creatures could hold secrets and offer silent judgment. As for Clara, she remained in Harmony Gulch, a changed woman, forever grateful for the second chance she had been given. She never forgot her past, but she refused to let it define her future. She had found her adventure, not in running from her life, but in embracing it, in helping to build a better world, one small act of kindness at a time. Harmony Gulch, once just a dusty town, had finally found its harmony.